Taming the High Cost of College, Episode 32.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello, and welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge. Today we have an interview with Roger Whitney. He is a financial planner, as well as a father who is dealing with college himself. And he's going to give us some of his financial planning insight, as well as insight into what's going on in his particular family, to give us some ideas and thoughts on how he handles college, both for himself and for his clients. So we're getting a lot of great information. After that, I'm going to answer the question about small businesses. A lot of small business owners are concerned as to whether or not they're going to have to report their small business and how they're going to value their business and how it's all going to work out as far as the college process is concerned. So we're going to get into that with the question and answer at the end. Again, as always, we have show notes available at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com/32. We also have many other podcasts available at our website, Taming the High Cost of College. So if this is your first podcast, this is the 32nd, so there's many other podcasts. You can go to the website and learn more, or subscribe through iTunes or Stitcher. And if you don't know what that means, you can explore that further as well. All right, let's jump into the interview with Roger Whitney. All right, today we're sitting down with Roger Whitney, the retirement answer man. Welcome, Roger.
Hey, Brad. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. So we're going to talk a little bit about college and retirement, obviously. But before we jump into that, can you give us a little bit of your history and how you came to be the retirement answer man?
Sure. Well, I've been a financial planner for 24 years and have walked that journey with Lord knows how many people. And it's a really cool stage of life where people are trying to figure out who they're going to be and how this whole retirement puzzle is going to work. And so I've always answered a lot of questions on that and helped people plan that journey and started to blog and podcast about it as a way to clear my thinking and think critically out loud and hopefully help others that are beyond the ones that I work with.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about college and retirement then. I would say a vast majority of people that are dealing with college also have retirement on their mind. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I'm dead center in the middle of that demographic. I'm 47, and I have a junior in high school, a daughter, and a son who is a freshman in college. And it's right at those peak times when we're thinking, oh, wow, retirement's getting closer. So I'm right in the spot of that conflict between the two.
Right. So what is your opinion as far as how a family should allocate resources when it comes to college?
The way I look at it is it's a balance sheet decision and a priorities decision. So I'll use myself as an example. 11 years ago, when my kids were a lot younger, I was just starting a business with two partners and had a year of literally no income because we were reinvesting in the company, and my wife wasn't working at the time. And I had to make a decision because we were saving for college, and I chose to forego saving for college so I could focus on building my cash flow and my balance sheet and betting on myself. Now, that can be scary because I don't think of it as a bucket system, but for me it's not so much about putting so much money in an envelope for college, and that's not a bad strategy. For me, it was thinking of it from a more holistic standpoint of having my cash flow and my net worth structured so by the time they get to college age, I'll be prepared to handle that, and I can decide on where I'll get those funds at that time. Right.
And that's an interesting strategy, and I actually recommend that too for what I would call early stage planning. In other words, you have a 3-year-old at home and you're saying, we want to save for college. A lot of times the best plan there is to, just build your overall net worth. Do the best you can saving for retirement. Do the best you can saving and investing just in accounts, and learn how to live within your means and all that kind of stuff. Because college is it's hard to predict for a 3-year-old, especially at this stage of the game.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like most people 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I guess, I had money in a investment-based 529 and, well, just by the luck of the draw for me, 10, 11 years later, it was worth roughly what I put into it. So betting on an investment-based solution to totally cover it based on long-term averages probably is not a perfect strategy. It may be part of the strategy, but not quite as simple as that. And people want simple solutions, and unfortunately, there aren't any when you're dealing with with college planning.
Right. So what's your philosophy? Many financial planners, essentially say, well, you can borrow money for college, but you can't borrow for retirement, which is a great platitude. But let's dive into that a little bit deeper, because although that's true, that doesn't really help.
Yeah, when we're talking, I think people don't think, and I'm speaking of myself here because I've been going through this, is that we don't think as creatively about college as we need to. College is a major industry, right? And the availability of financing for college feeds the tuition rate increases that we've seen over the last 10 or 15 years. And it's a nice little circle there. And I've seen many clients and individuals that I've counseled that have had their child going to theater school and having $200,000 in college debt and literally not have a career to come out into.
Right.
And that tends to be normal thinking. So I don't think we think as creatively about how to do college as we need to. We're all tied up in this dream of the 4-year experience that is the stereotype.
Right. And I would agree with that. So let's say I'm kind of in your position, and let's say your youngest comes to you and says, "Hey, Dad, how much do I get to spend on college?" How do you answer that question?
Well, I'll answer that by giving you a conversation I had with my daughter about a year ago. So she is an artsy type, and she is in band. And she came to me and she goes, Dad, I figured out what I want to do. I want to be a high school band teacher, and I want to go to Texas Christian University, which is the local university here, and it's a private school. And she was passionate about it. And I'm like, being the CFP, thinking I'm going to have this wonderful learning moment. I'm like, okay, Emma, well, let's sit down and let's look at this. What does a band teacher make in high school? And I don't know what it is. Say it's $30,000 or $40,000 a year. And how much does Texas Christian cost? Well, it costs about $40,000 or $50,000 a year. So to go get a 4-year education and spend almost $200,000 to come out and have the potential earnings of $30,000 to $40,000 a year doesn't quite work. And I start saying, well, now University of North Texas, which is just up the road a little bit, has an awesome band program, and it costs $13,000 a year. So if you want to be a band teacher, that might be a better dream for you. And I was trying to walk her through this logic, but being 16 at the time, she just looked at me like I had crushed her puppy, that I had crushed her dream.
Yes.
But those are the kind of conversations that are important. And what ended up happening, which is as a postscript, about 6 months later, I realized the reason she wanted to go to TCU to be a band teacher is because the student teacher in her class was a band major at TCU, and he was really hot.
Yes, I run into that a lot too, where students are choosing schools based on where the boyfriend or girlfriend is going to be, and of course we know how that will turn out with the young love. But yes,
and that's perfectly natural. When I was in college, I don't know about you, Brad, but when I was in college or high school, I just knew two things: is I wanted to go to a Big Ten school, and it couldn't be University of Michigan. Beyond that, I really didn't have any criteria. So I think that is the mentality of a teenager, and it's up to us to help give them some framework. And there's a line, and this is the hard part with parents when we think about college is, and I don't know where that line is, but I've seen it. You just know when it's crossed between supporting the dreams and desires of your kids and enabling them. And that's a really important line that you need to figure out. Am I enabling my child, which is not a healthy thing, or am I supporting their dreams, which is a healthy thing? And I think with college especially, those kids get their eyes on a certain college and an image in their mind's eyes. We want to please our kids, so we got to be careful of where that line is.
Right. So when you're working with families that are talking about college, I mean, what's your general philosophy? Is college a means to a career? Is it a chance to grow up? And how do you explain that to families?
I'll give you a couple examples. One is I had this conversation with a client and his son probably about 8 months ago. And his son's super smart, wants to be a doctor. And his father has the means and the ability to pay for his schooling. And he wants to go to Rice University, which they call the Harvard of the South, down here in Texas anyway. And I was sitting with him and I said, okay, John, now your dad, he's paying for all of your college. So if you want to go to Rice for undergrad and then go on to med school, this is roughly what it's going to cost. And I forget the exact number. And then I started to explain to the son, I'm like, now, John, what if you went to your dad and said, Dad, here's my plan. I'm actually going to go to community college for 2 years to get my basics out of the way, and I'll live at home. That's going to save you probably, and I forget what the number was, let's say it's $80,000 by me doing this. And then I can transfer to Rice and go on where I'm really getting the professors. So I'm going to save you $80,000. How about I do that, Dad, and you and I split the difference? Trying to get him to think in an economic term of that's a win-win, right? Because Dad was ready to pay for 4 years at Rice. So trying to help not just the parents think creatively, but the kids think creatively about why they're going to college. Because, again, they get that dream. And I think the light bulb went on. And his dad was sitting right there, and he giggled. And he probably would have took the deal. I don't think they did that. But and then I think the idea of going to community college for a year or two is something that a lot of people don't consider seriously enough in terms of helping control the costs of college.
Right. I think the big downside to community college is the college experience. I think a lot of families really want to have and are willing to pay for the typical college experience. Go live on a campus away from home, get a chance to grow up.
Yeah, that's a very good point. My wife is that way with our son who's at Texas Tech. She was really wanting him to have that college experience. So that's a very good point. But if we're, that has to be factored into, do you have the means to be able to pay for that college education? And if you have to borrow, then it's going to be a values-based decision on, well, how important is that? Is it important enough to take on all this debt?
Right, exactly. And a lot of times you can get something similar to a community college by going to a local state college as well, where you can be on campus. It just may not be the flagship, Texas A&M. It may be, University of Texas, Midland, or some smaller school in your neck of the woods, or in my neck of the woods, it would be, University of Wisconsin Stout, or where the costs are reasonable relative to the flagship schools and especially private schools.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for any parents listening, it's how do you help frame that for your child, your daughter, your son, because they're not equipped to, most of them aren't equipped to intellectually or emotionally enough to help make those decisions. They get, it could be they want to go to University of Michigan because they like the fight song. I mean, it can be that simple.
Right. Exactly.
And it's up to us as parents to say, well, you could go to Michigan State or you could go to Central Michigan, and they may be like my daughter. They may feel like you've crushed their dreams, but the earlier you start having those conversations, so they're thinking, the better. And also the earlier you start having conversations about the economics of it, even if you are the one paying for it. That way the kids have some clue.
Right. And I think another thing you need to do is give high school kids a sense of the value of money. And here's what I mean. Most students will say $5,000, $50,000, and $500,000 are all big numbers, more money than I've ever seen. I would sign a loan, any one of those, because as far as I'm concerned, they're just big numbers and there's really no difference. we as parents obviously know the difference, but I think as students will say, well, $50,000, well, that's just what it costs. What's the big deal? They don't understand that's 2 cars a year for 4 years. And
yeah, exactly. And then they can get, hampered when they graduate and be burdened with these loans for decades.
Right. Now, when you worked with your family, what was your expectation of the students' piece of the puzzle? Are you expecting them to work on campus during breaks? Are you expecting them to work at all? Are you just paying the freight? How did you?
Well, my son Spencer is at his first semester at Texas Tech, and he's going to get employment. So we're paying for his housing, his meal plan, and his education. And then everything else is sort of on him. And he is like I was at that age. He was very bad with money. I was not good with money when I was that age. And we have this ongoing debate where we give him, I think, like $200 a month, just pocket money. And he blows through that really quickly. And it's generally Starbucks or not eating at the university diners or whatever, or dining facilities. His plan is he's going to work when he comes home for Christmas, which he'll be home for about a little over a month and a half. And then he's going to work while he's at school to pay everything extra. So that's basically what my mom did. Now, I went to a community college for a year and a half. And when I went to college, my mom paid my tuition and my housing. And then I worked probably 20 hours a week. And I think there's a lot of value to that. Kids got a lot of free time. I had enough time to have fun when I worked 20 hours a week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would agree with that. For some students, the transition to, well, I go to class for 3 hours a day and I should be studying another 5 hours a day, but nobody's going to make me, is a tough transition. But again, and squeezing some work in there for a lot of families makes sense. Now, what's your opinion of this? I've had a number of families where paying for the more expensive school is a stretch. And my recommendation was to, talk to your student and ask what they're willing to do to make it happen. It's not all on you necessarily. If you're willing to take out that loan, are they willing to pay it back? And then I said, and here's what I would do. I would sign a contract that says when you graduate, you're paying back these loans first. So you can't buy new cars. You can't live anywhere without a roommate. You can't do any of these, and make it as strict as you want to be, but just say, these are the expectations. You will do this and this and this. And if you can't pay me back, I expect you to be delivering pizzas on Friday and Saturday night until you're caught up.
Yeah, I think as much skin as they can have in the game, I think the better. I mean, at the end of the day, unless you're planning on working at top-notch law firms or medical facilities out east, it really doesn't matter where you go to school. What matters much more is your work ethic, your competency, and your ability to interact with people.
Right. So, and that's another segment of the population. And I'd like to get your opinion on this. Let's say you've got that solid B student who, ultimately is going to go to work, in some local factory or local business, or maybe not local here, but wherever they choose to land. But they don't have a specified career path. They're just after that piece of paper that will allow them to go to these big companies and interview. I mean, it's really hard to interview at a GE or a Ford Motor Company if you don't have a degree. Doesn't matter what the degree is in, as long as you have a degree. Now they'll consider you for various positions in the, bookkeeping office or the accounting or whatever. And they don't expect you to know anything. They're going to train you on the job. So if you just want the piece of paper, what are you telling people, parents about that? And maybe they won't even succeed. If we try really hard, they'll probably make it. But, I could see them being one of those kids that drops out. How do you coach parents in that situation?
Well, my wife works in the HR industry and has for 25 years. And I will tell you, it is very important that you have that bachelor's degree. That is, if you don't, that definitely will put a ceiling above what you might get opportunities for. especially if you're looking at more corporate type of work. Now, that's very different than entrepreneurial type of ventures. But having a bachelor's degree is important if you're going to go into the normal corporate environment. If you don't, your earnings will be limited, at least at the beginning, until you prove yourself. So it is important. And whether you're a B or a C student, bluntly, I was a C student in high school because I just didn't care. I hated high school, and I flourished in college. So going to just getting that degree, and you talked about it earlier, that experience of college, part of college is academics, but part of it is identifying who yourself is, and part of it is maturing and figuring out who you are. And it's a safe environment to start to become more independent. And that's extremely valuable, like you talked about before. And I think if you getting that bachelor's degree, it doesn't matter what school it is, as long as it's, a accredited school, you'll be able to get that and start to figure out where you want to go from there.
Right. Now, Roger, do you have employees?
We have 13 advisors, and we have 2 technical employees, yes.
Okay. So as an employee, and I also have a few employees, and I think one of the challenges today is dealing with the mindset of, I have the piece of paper. I graduated from college. You owe me a job. And as employers, I tend to ask, well, what are you going to do for me that will warrant me paying you? And I think there's a major disconnect as far as how college is sold. Because a lot of people say, well, you're going to earn $1 million more if you have a college degree over your lifetime than if you don't. Because that's what the averages are.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, for parents that have high schoolers, I'll tell you, I used to recruit at major colleges in a previous position, and I would go to all the colleges around Texas, and the attitude of the students mirrored what you were saying. So I'm not going to pick on schools, but the more local blue collar-ish type of universities, those students were awesome. They were there, they were selling themselves, and they wanted to know how they could help you. They were hungry to work for you. And when I interviewed at some of the more quote unquote prestigious colleges that were private, it was more the attitude you just described. Okay, so tell me about your benefits plan. Tell me what my what do you offer me, was the attitude. So when I was recruiting at all these universities, I used to hire from the more blue collar type of universities because the kids had the right attitude. They understood work a little bit more. At least they presented it that way. And we ended up getting great candidates from more blue collarish type of universities.
Absolutely. And I can tell you that as an employer, and I'm sure most employers say, we've got these pain points, and if we could hire an employee that would solve this pain, we would pay them whatever they're worth. But if they're just going to show up and expect a paycheck, well, and we've got to drive them and push them, and it's a different mindset that I think parents need to teach their children.
Yeah, I think for your audience, that's an important lesson is, for all of us. And I've failed a little bit with my kids, and I've had some success with my kids of trying to have them have that type of attitude. Every teenager has that it's very strong sense of self-entitlement. And it's important that they understand the value of work and present it that way of not, what do you have for me, but here's what I have to offer to you.
Okay. So let's change subject real quick again. And I'm sure you run into this a lot. How are you helping parents that look like they're coming up short on their own retirement and they're talking, spending quite a bit of money on college? What do you do for them? How do you help? What kind of advice do you give them?
Well, I think the way retirement is thought about, everybody feels like they're coming up short on their retirement savings, but that's another discussion. You help them understand the trade-offs. I've seen a lot of parents literally sacrifice their financial futures for the education of their kids. And that makes no sense to me. I understand helping the next generation, but if you're not helping yourself first, you're not going to be there to be able to help them throughout their lives. It's a hard trade-off. I think if you do a lot of the things that we talked about, is help the kids have a skin in the game, help them be more thoughtful on picking the college that they should go to and understanding what college is for, not cross the line from supporting to enabling. That goes a long way into keeping that balance between college savings and taking care of yourself financially.
Right. And I think it's also helping people pick priorities. For a lot of families, college is important, retirement is important, yet when you look at their cash flow, it looks like vacations are important, sports fees are important, the extra home or the motor home or the, whatever is much more important than anything else.
Well, that's the hard part of finance, personal finance anyway. And I use as a tool the net worth statement with all the clients that I work with. That's where we spend probably 80% of our time is looking at the net worth statement and how cash flows are being allocated to that net worth statement. And over time, your net worth statement truly is a reflection of what your priorities are, regardless of what you say. We all have this voice in our head that tells us what our priorities are, and I'm totally guilty of this, but the proof is in the pudding. Financially speaking, of what you just said, is if you say saving for retirement and college education are your two top priorities, well, over time, you can see whether you're speaking those priorities in terms of how you manage your cash flow and what your net worth statement looks like. And it can be pretty damning. It has for me. I mean, this is an ongoing struggle for me, just like everybody else.
Right.
The key is having some process and be willing to look at the facts and work to modify and try to keep what you say your priorities are and how you're actually allocating whatever assets and income you have to be in alignment. And I think most of us, the people that do it poorly, are just not willing to even address it. So
Right.
The first step is realize addressing it, and then it's what you do from there.
Right. Now, and also I think for a lot of people, it's if you build a system, you might have more success. So, and again, what I'm saying is the pay yourself first concept of, let's max out your 401k, then you won't, you'll forget you're losing it, and all of a sudden you'll grow a net worth that way. Let's auto invest $300 a month for college.
Definitely. I think having some repeatable process that can serve you as your compass is key. And there's a great quote by Ken Davis that says, if you're enslaved to your compass, you can enjoy the freedom of the seas. And I think financially, your compass is having a process of how you make these decisions will give you the freedom to think creatively and live ultimately a more balanced life.
Right, exactly. Because I meet a lot of families that have income that is good income, where other people would be a little envious to say, well, man, I could do all kinds of stuff if I had that kind of income. Yet they feel strapped because, and it's what I call the bigger garage theory. I don't care how big your garage is, it's not big enough because you get more stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we all know this intuitively. It's just we don't know how to find that balance. We don't have the framework to make a lot of those decisions, and that's a lot of what I talk about on my blog is how to build that framework for making those smarter financial decisions.
Right. And then what about robbing? I guess I kind of colored that already by using that word of robbing, but what about taking money from your retirement plan to deal with college? And when I mean that, maybe it's your 401k, maybe it's an IRA.
Well, that's no different than taking a loan. I rarely ever recommend that anybody take a loan against their retirement funds to pay for college. In an ideal world, what you need to be doing, if I know college is coming, right? If you have a junior in high school and you know college is coming, you need to be planning for that as a sophomore and a freshman when your kids are a sophomore or freshman and junior, so you can start to build up those, whether it's those cash reserves or those savings or those investments earmarked for that. As it's no different than when you're thinking about retirement. When you know something's coming up, you need to plan for it before it comes, not right when it hits you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not a big fan of borrowing against retirement accounts to pay for college.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, especially if it's kind of a reaction to a big price tag or whatever it might be. That the exception to that would be when we have families that are intentionally overfunding retirement. and we get some sort of benefit for that. So we put an extra $10,000 in your 401k so that we can borrow $10,000 a couple years later. That sometimes works, but it takes a lot of discipline.
Exactly.
And then what about investing? Are you willing to be in the markets right now with your college money, with kids already in college? And what would you recommend for high school parents again? Should they be using markets or not? Or
well, let's think about that for a second. The number one determinant on investing is your time frame, because we have a fairly good understanding of what markets, whether we're talking bond markets or stock markets or commodities markets, we have a really good understanding of what they can potentially provide over time. And investing is meant to be a very long-term proposition, so you can experience the typical average over a very long period of time. The shorter that time span is, the less clarity and the more risk of having a capital drawdown or a loss is greater. So no, I don't think it makes sense at all to have investment assets for monies that you think you're going to need to touch within the next 3 to 5 years, especially in this environment. Well, really in any environment.
Okay. Oh, great. I think that wraps things up. So if you could give us like 3 quick tips before we wrap up, and as far as what parents could do to help with the college/retirement conundrum, I would appreciate it.
3 tips for the college: do a net worth statement and understand your cash flow so you can start to think about where the resources are going to come from for college. And think beyond a 529 plan or other college savings plan, so you can think of it from a balance sheet perspective. Number 2 is going to be, think very seriously about stair-stepping the college experience, whether it's going from community college ultimately to the school that they want to go to, or whether it's going to a one university and moving up. And thirdly is highly encourage your children to work and have some skin in the game in college.
All right. Great ideas. I appreciate it, Roger. If people want to learn more about you, I know you've got a podcast and a blog, and how do we get more information about what you're doing?
Yeah, you can go to rogerwhitney.com. I blog there a few times a week, and I have a weekly podcast, and I have a retirement toolbox, which is a toolbox of over 20 checklists and worksheets that you can use to work to make smarter decisions as you work towards retirement. And that's all available for free at rogerwhitney.com.
All right. Thanks for all your help, Roger. And we'll probably talk to you again. Thank you.
All right, Brad. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Have a question? Brad is accepting questions from his listeners now. Record a question at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com and get it answered on one of the future episodes.
Today's question came from a business owner who was wondering if he would have to report the value of his business when he's filling out financial aid forms. So, do businesses count against you when it comes to financial aid? Now, there's some rumors out there that the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. The correct answer is maybe, and here's how we can figure that out. First of all, for the FAFSA, there's a lot of businesses that will not be reported. So when it comes to the federal financial aid forms, in a lot of cases, small businesses will not be included on the form, and it will not be used against you. So in order to be excluded from the FAFSA form, a small business must have less than 100 employees, be more than 50% owned by the family, be a U.S.-based corporation, and a few other things like that. So for a lot of small businesses, so this would be the typical restaurant, doctor's office, small construction firm, small factory, service businesses, accounting firms, all that kind of stuff. A lot of those types of firms will not be included as far as an asset for the family when they fill out the financial aid form. Now, there's a big group of colleges that are the exception to that rule because in addition to the FAFSA, they also ask for the CSS profile and they get what's called the business supplement form. So there's some colleges out there, in the end, will have you fill out a form called the business supplement form or farm supplement form. And in either case, they will learn about your business. And these forms are relatively complex. A lot of families have their accountant help them fill it out because they ask about things like, what are the assets to the business? Does the business have cash reserves or checking accounts? Does the business have tangible property like buildings or equipment? And has it been depreciated and how much? Also talks about what the general revenues of the companies are and how much they pay their officers, etc. So they get a pretty good snapshot of the operating side of the business as well as the asset side of the business. Now, colleges collect that information, but the colleges that are collecting it don't necessarily have to use it in order to figure out your financial aid. So I firmly believe that a lot of colleges do use it, but some colleges may not use it if they consider it to be a relatively low value business. So as an example, if you're a realtor and you're a one-person business, they may totally exclude the business form once they realize that there really isn't much there. But for a lot of colleges, they're trying to figure out if there is something there because, again, the FAFSA doesn't ask any questions about the business, and for a lot of cases, it's completely excluded. So as with many other things, the CSS profile schools, or the schools that require more information, may look a little farther and learn more about your financial situation. Schools that do not require the CSS profile, or the FAFSA schools, they may not require information about your business, nor would they hold your business against you. And again, just to review, the CSS schools are typically the more expensive private schools, certainly the Ivy League, Harvard and Yale, and schools like NYU and USC and Boston College and Notre Dame and University of Chicago. And then there's some smaller liberal arts colleges like a Pitzer or a St. Olaf that require the CSS as well. And the reason that the CSS is required by those schools is because they are offering generally larger scholarships, and they want to see the whole picture so that they give those larger scholarships to what is in their opinion the right people. And because the FAFSA doesn't give them very much information, they require that you provide more information above and beyond the FAFSA so they can make an informed decision. When it comes to the FAFSA itself, that's all schools out there, and there's about 4,000 of all the schools together. There's about 4,000, and about 300 or 350 require the CSS profile. So there's a vast number of schools where the CSS profile is not required, and therefore your business may never show up. Hopefully that helps, and I appreciate you listening. We're going to wrap things up. Again, if you need show notes, you can go to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com/32 and get show notes. If you enjoyed what you're learning, please pass it along to a friend and let them know about our podcast, or give us a rating and review in iTunes or Stitcher. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns two companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.